Hi, this is Lamar, and you're listening to Getting to Third Space with Lamar and Tom. A third space is a term that refers to a safe space for people to come together for respectful dialogue in a spirit of listening, sharing, and learning. In this podcast, we explore what it means to have third space conversations, and we try to model them. Getting to Third Space is produced by Tenacious Change, a consultancy committed to creating resilient, nonprofit organizations. If you like what you hear in this podcast, please be sure to subscribe, share it, and of course, like it. The more people join us, the quicker we get to third space as a society. Now let's get to third space today.
Hey, good morning, Lamar. How's it going out there in Kansas today?
Good morning, Tom. It's a windy one today, but you know, it is Kansas and the wind blows as it will.
What, any tumbleweeds yet?
Oh yeah. There's always tumbleweeds out here. From last year, maybe. From Oklahoma blow up here. I mean, there are tumbleweeds.
When I lived there, I lived in Western Kansas for a year, and
right.
I loved the tumbleweeds. I thought they were so cool. And when they come across the highway, as long as there wasn't anybody coming
right.
or behind me, I would see if I could run over them, you know.
They can get pretty big, let me tell you.
Yes, they can. And I had to think very carefully on a couple of occasions whether I really wanted to tackle one of those tumbleweeds. But yeah, it was pretty cool.
I'd be happy to ship you one. You could put it in front of your house. And...
Can you? Actually, I could stand out by the street and kind of hide it behind me, and as cars go by, throw it out in front of them, see what they do. You know.
Well, my understanding is there was a gentleman who made a little business off of shipping tumbleweeds around or at least around the country. Yeah.
No kidding.
Yeah. But I'm not going to do that.
Who knew?
Who knew?
I mean, you could add that to, Roth photography and tumbleweeds.
Tumbleweeds. and lately duck staining. So I've been staining my duck.
And deck staining. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That sounds incredibly messy.
It is. And I may have to go back and redo some things.
Oh,
it is what it is. So what have you been up to, Tom?
What have I been up to? Well, we're going to be moving. And when you and Carla were here, we got to take you out to the house site. And we are hoping to be moving by mid-September, and hopefully not later than mid-October of this year. And we're pretty excited about that. And so there's an awful lot of stuff that's going into planning for the move. So I'm getting really well acquainted with things like basement floor treatments and garage floor treatments and
understand
and stuff like that. So
I'm glad it's you.
Yes, and my Clemencia has put me in charge of kind of doing a lot of these arrangements. We talk about it, and then I make contact, and so I'm getting acquainted with things like measuring for blinds and windows and window treatments.
So, by the way, we had a great time. My wife Carla and I drove from Heston, Kansas to West Virginia to Virginia, and then up to Maryland, and had a great time with you, Clemencia.
We had a great time with you.
Went to the horse tracks.
Yes,
who
we
knew?
did. And we went to, let's just say it, we went to Pimlico, right?
Yeah.
The week before the Preakness, because it was free and we didn't have to pay to go.
We're cheapskates, right?
We're cheapskates. But we got to see some horse races, some beautiful horses. That was pretty neat. Well, we could really do an entire podcast debating whether or not Pimlico needs to continue to exist or not. It's pretty trashy. So but
I did. I invested in Pimlico.
Oh, you did?
$12. Yeah.
Well, that was good. That was big of you.
I thought I would give them $12 of my hard-earned money and watch the horses run. That's what happened. So
there you go. Well,
it was fun.
That was good of you. Well, we had a great time with you guys. We had a good trip, and or you had a good trip. We didn't go anywhere. I mean, well, actually, we did kind of go. You learned about traffic in the DC area when it's raining.
Yep.
Oh my gosh.
We
what a
were on the
terrible-
road for 14 days, and we had 3 days where it didn't rain. So, but that's okay. Yep. And
Yep.
Tom, you are quite the stock car driver out there, let me tell you.
I
Good
tell
for
you.
you.
Oh my gosh. Well,
Okay.
hey, we have a guest today, someone that you've worked hard to get lined up. You want to tell us a little bit about her, and then we'll let her in from the green room.
You bet. Well, actually, we're both pretty excited about having Carolyn McGinn, Kansas State Senator Carolyn McGinn, joining us today. And she has been a longtime senator here in Kansas, been in the House for quite a while. And she just announced this year that this is her last session. She's retiring at the end of the year. So over 20 years of service. So we're looking forward to having an opportunity to ask her some questions about communication and dealing with difficult subjects.
Well, if you have been a senator for a while or a politician for a while, you know something about talking to constituents and colleagues and peers
Absolutely.
about difficult topics. So this will be a lot of fun to meet Carolyn and to spend some time with her today. So we're going to let her in from the green room, and then we'll continue from there.
Well, all right, let's welcome the green room, Carolyn. We are pleased to have you here. Kansas Senator Carolyn McGinn is joining us, and it's been a bit. We've gone back and forth and trying to get a time that works for you and for us, and we so much appreciate you being here.
Well, glad to be here. Thank you for asking me.
You've had quite a career as senator in Kansas. How many years has it been in total?
As senator, 20 years, and before that, I was a county commissioner for 6 years in the Wichita area.
Oh my goodness! So 26 years of service in Kansas, and you're going to be wrapping that up shortly. Is that correct?
I will be. When the next senator comes in early January, I'll finally be retired.
Okay. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
I'm sure you have some great plans going ahead. I was able to retire about a year ago, and I still can't get the smile off my face. That's a good thing. Well, with such a long career, what we do in this podcast is we want to talk about the things that we've learned and how we communicate with people, how we have good conversation. And in your career, I'm sure there are a lot of lessons you've learned in working with people. And as you get to your last day, what are some of the takeaways that you might have, the things that you've learned that you're excited to take away and maybe even share with others at some point?
Well, I've learned a great deal and also met a lot of people all across the state and all across the nation as well. I mean, your world doesn't end just with your district for sure, because you have to work with 165 other people to get anything done. And early on, I had no interest in politics ever. And it really became a grassroots effort as far as my kids being involved in school and a controversy there and a property rights issue. And then next thing I know, I'm going to a lot of meetings that other elected officials are going to, and had the opportunity to run at that time for county commission and then later as a senator. But I guess one of the things I think that is most important is the fact that you really have to be as honest as you can when you're talking to constituents and your colleagues about issues that are uncomfortable. And you may have to share and talk about things that you know that they are on the other side. And it's so important to have that candid conversation because of the long-term relationship that you'll have with those individuals. I've had a lot of people tell me, I didn't always agree with you on issues, Carolyn, but I felt like you were trying to explain everything as best you could so that we could understand the issue as well. And then also is true with your colleagues, with lobbyists, with other people as well. because you have to build those relationships, because those are the people you're going to work with from year to year. And people respect that. And I don't always see that all the time anymore. It used to be in my early days was if you told somebody how you were going to vote, and you changed your mind in the course of the debate on the floor, you always needed to let them know you were going to change your vote. You don't surprise them. But I think that has been probably one of the most important things. And then another lesson I think about, especially because I was a budget chair for many years, and you had to get it passed. And there's some people that just won't vote for a budget. Doesn't matter what's in it. They just refuse to do it. And I always think about the Zig Ziglar quote that you can have anything in life you want if you help others get what they want. And that was one of the things I did as a chairman, was help my other colleagues get some of the things they needed back home in their district. And that was what was successful in getting a budget passed.
So, so as Lamar mentioned just a couple minutes ago, Carolyn, this podcast is really about conversations and how to have conversations that are civil, a dialogue that is civil on even difficult topics. One of the things that we have learned along the way as we've been doing the podcast and interviewing different folks is that the term civil conversation and civil dialogue can mean different things to different people. And so I know you've been thinking about this a little bit. What do those concepts mean to you? How do you define those?
Well, for me, it's the ability to exchange ideas about things that are best for your community or your state in a respectful manner. And, that's not to say that you can't be passionate about an issue. You certainly can. And I think that passionate tone is important too, because then people really, they can really see and know where you're at and what you really believe. This is something I like to kind of digress just a little bit, if I may. In thinking about this question, one of the things that I've seen is that because of changes in technology, it has changed the way we have civil discourse. When I first started, we had a telephone, and we were just starting to get, we had snail mail, but we were just starting to get email. And now people are starting to communicate with, I don't know, Twitter or whatever it's called today. You got Thread, you have Instagram, you have all these other modes of communication. But in the last few years, what I've seen is that people like to read, they have apps on their phones, and they like to read what they want to read. I mean, you generally have an app because you like reading what is on that app. But what has occurred is that when they click on something, that app sometimes is programmed to go to our emails. And it's a pre-formed letter about an issue. And early on, I would pick up the phone and call the individual. And the reason I did is because, especially if the email may have an angry tone or something to it, or it's just a sensitive issue that I wanted to talk to them in person. When I called, then they were like, "Oh, I didn't know I sent you an email." So these apps are programmed where people don't know. So when I go to legislative updates, I will tell people that, you may send us something that you feel passionate about, but if you want us to read it, to know that it really came from you, put a couple sentences there at the top and just say, here's what I'm concerned about. And the below, the description of how I feel is below, because then now I know they read it, so, and the problem with this technology too, in my opinion, is we lose sight of all the things our senses pick up. the tone of voice, perhaps on a telephone call, their demeanor in having that conversation, and the tone. And we all know back when email was new, you'd send an email and you thought it was friendly, and then somebody took it the wrong way, and then the whole thing escalates from there. So, I really try to do some of the older modes of communication to better communicate to people. And I found that to be successful because, one, they're just happy we call them back. They kind of think we just sit up there in Topeka and, don't do anything. I mean, don't communicate. And we've got to get back to that personal communication so that we can figure out together how to solve problems.
So I really do appreciate your comment about the apps. I have an app on my phone that allows me to call my legislators about issues that I feel are important to me. What I like about that is that it does go to a voicemail, and they're getting that in my voice. I'm not reading a script. I'm not sending the form letter. And I've also seen those apps that says, send this letter. And I try to do exactly what you talked about, which is if I do that, I put in a note that says basically to say to them, this is not coming from a bot. This is coming from me. And I really am a person and a voter. So I think that's a really important and useful point to make. And I really appreciate it that you did.
Yeah, I think that we've done a couple of podcasts prior to this about artificial intelligence and how it kind of interjects itself into communication in sometimes positive ways, but sometimes more difficult ways. And I think that one of the challenges we have is we have relied on these, on whether we're using an app or other forms of electronic communication, and we've lost our voice and lost the ability to kind of read each other as we're communicating. And so I appreciate what you said. That was something I never even thought of, that the information you're getting from constituents and voters may also not be accurate information. And that's a bit scary on my side when I think about that.
Yeah, and I think that we lose the ability to articulate because we don't exercise that part of our brain now because somebody has just done it for us. And then, when you think about things a little bit deeper, then you can kind of come to know more things that you didn't realize because you just hadn't thought about it.
If I could turn it back on kind of a focus on what civil conversation is. And, I know in 2012, that election cycle, you had quite a few people who were running, who actually kind of targeted you in kind of where you were, even people from your own political party. So it was kind of a tough go. And I'm sure there were some interesting conversations, difficult conversations. Can you give us maybe an example of how you worked through that and kind of how you kept your conversation civil in times where maybe you found yourself kind of a bit of a target?
Well, it was difficult, and it was also disappointing to see our party get so involved in primaries. It used to be parties would stay out of the primary and then get in the general, whichever way they want. But yeah, I lost a lot of colleagues that year as well. And but one of the things that we did, my team, was stay engaged with the community, work on your message, know what your opponent is sending out about you. But the biggest thing was I had a track record that, in my opinion, was quite positive, and I focused on it. And one had to do with the Affordable Airfares program. And what that was is we needed a discount carrier at the Wichita airport in order to keep the other airlines' air rates down. And so it was a big deal that we got that passed. And I worked very hard on that particular program. So we had, I don't know who it was, Vanguard or somebody, but then eventually we finally got the ultimate goal was to have Southwest here. And our rates are comparable, and it means a lot. I just, a few years ago, brought a conference here to Wichita, and you have to have good air rates in order to bring those conferences to Wichita. And so, anyway, it was just one thing. And then we had an engineering bill. We needed more engineers to build airplanes. And not just that, lawnmowers up in Heston and tractors up in Heston and things like that. But, so we put together an engineering program that was successful. So I stayed focused on what I had accomplished, and not so much on some of the messages that they were targeting me on. And then, of course, there's always misinformation in the postcards, if you haven't noticed by now. But so you have to call those people that call you up and say, hey, I saw this postcard and what happened and that type of thing. So I just tried to stay focused on the track record of the things that we had done that was good for Kansas.
Well, you came through a pretty difficult time there in 2012, as you said, and I think it's probably safe to say, that since 2012, American politics have become very divisive and pretty challenging, regardless of the party that you're in, and so I cannot imagine myself entering politics at this time. If I were younger than what I am, I might consider it, but I would still have a lot of second thoughts because of just how divisive things are. And yet people do. They still do enter politics. Why do you think people come into politics even now, especially at a time when there's a lot of division?
Well, I like to think that those that come into politics are very genuine and they want to serve people. But sometimes people come into politics like, you meet people in college that are getting a political science degree. And perhaps, maybe they want to be a staffer, but they may also, if they have the opportunity to run, be a politician. And then you also have people that just want to keep climbing a ladder. They go from representative to senator, and they think someday they'll be in Congress or they'll be the governor. So, you have people that have different aspirations. But one of the things is that, and I think a lot of people are also like I was. It was grassroots is the one reason I got into politics. It had to do with things that were going on in my community and my county at the time. And so I like to think that that's why most people get involved in politics is they want to make a difference. They want to make a positive difference. You get into, there are some people too that, it's always about winners and losers, and that's unfortunate. But after I watch those individuals over time, I start to see that they have built a relationship with their district and their colleagues. And you see this change. And then you have somebody as well that you can work with, because you may not agree with people on every issue, but there may be a situation that happened in my life and somebody else's life that I don't normally agree with them politically. And if you build that relationship, you end up working together and get something done. But I really do believe that people generally want to make a positive difference.
Mm-hmm. So this is Lamar is used to these kinds of crazy thoughts that pop into my head, right? And so one of these just popped into my head based on what I was hearing you say, and that is, it strikes me that sometimes politics is a lot like professional wrestling. That when you're in the ring, you are mortal enemies, and you are just, doing everything you can just to pulverize the other person. And then after the match, if fans stick around long enough, they'll see you walking out of the locker room and chumming around and being buddies. I don't think it's quite like that in politics, but sometimes I get the feeling that, especially when you're watching what's happening on the news, sometimes I get the feeling that it's a little bit like that. My sense is that you're a lot more friendlier. You're a lot more friendly with the people across the aisle than what is sometimes suggested in the coverage we get of politics. Is that right?
Oh, I would agree. And we have two parties in the Republican Party. We have the far right, and we have a few moderates left. They're kind of an endangered species these days. But no, you realize that they are an individual who has families just like you, parents, siblings, whatever. And they have challenges as well. And so you see that personal side of them, and you're correct. It's kind of like leave it on the floor when you leave, and build those relationships, whether it's at supper or whether it's at a reception or whatever. Because again, there's going to be an issue that you're both going to be on the same side, and you sure don't want to burn any bridges if you're trying to get something done.
It has to be satisfying when you're able to work with people with differing opinions, and being able to be transparent and being able to have good conversation, healthy conversation, able to get things done, be able to make decisions together, pass resolutions, whatever the work is ahead. That has to be satisfying. I'm guessing, I'm pretty sure that there are times where that's not the case, where the conversations are difficult, where maybe transparency isn't as present as you'd like to be. Can you tell us about, without using names or identifying people, can you talk about conversations you've had that have been difficult conversations, but you've been able to maintain civility in that conversation, how you did that? Well,
generally, it's trying to keep your cool, especially, like, for instance, I had a leader, we'll just call it a leader, that wasn't very happy with me because I was at a larger leadership meeting with more than just legislators. And of course, somebody had to ask the question, so what do you think? And everybody just sat there, and I couldn't help myself, of course. So I had to tell them what I thought. And it wasn't what my leader wanted me to say. And this individual finally later found me and really went off on me and was not very happy. And I just started saying, well, what about this? And I just started breaking down everything that was going on as a result of the meeting and the future. And this individual calmed totally down. And I have a lot of respect for this leader. And the reason I do is, even though this individual would get very passionate and expressive, it was one of those people that individuals that never made it personal. It was never personal. If this individual, I wasn't saying what they wanted, they never went to a personal level. And because of that, I mean, we're friendly to this day. And I have a respect for that person because of that. Appreciated that person's passion. But I also appreciated, I just never, sometimes people will take something to a personal level and you feel a little bit bruised afterwards. And this was one of those individuals you could go out to dinner with when you're done.
So in that situation, in hindsight, You were asked this question. Or everyone was asked this question. What do you think? In hindsight, would you have done that differently? Or, I mean, you had that opportunity afterwards to work with this person and process through it. Would you have done anything differently? Or do you feel like that was a good example of how to process situations and conversations?
In that situation with that individual, I would not have done anything differently because it happened more than once. And just being able to stay calm and start talking through the whole issue kind of brought them back, and then we can move on.
So a few minutes ago, you said something that just kind of took me back a little bit, and you said there's two parties within the Republican Party right now, the far right and the moderates, and then I think you said the moderates are becoming more and more scarce. Some would say that this is part of an observation that they make that that our democracy may be pretty fragile today, and in fact may be in danger. So this is kind of a two-part question. One is, what role do you think civil conversation plays in a democracy? And then, is it possible at the extremes to have civil conversations relative to democracy?
Well, I am concerned about how we, what do I want to say, go about our politics, particularly during an election. There's too much jabs that go in. We've gone to a soundbite election, political election. I watched that. I noticed that when trying to think of what year it was. We had like 13 Republicans running. And I remember in a debate when there were several up on the stage, the question was asked, what are you going to do to Jeb Bush? What are you going to do to improve the economy or, get inflation under control or whatever? And he started to explain his whole thing, his plan. And he was immediately cut off in less than 20 seconds because they allowed the other people on the stage to cut in instead of just giving him his 2 minutes to explain what his plan was. And then the whole rest of the debate that year turned into soundbite jabs on stage and gotcha. And what was disappointing for me was I wanted to hear the plan. I wanted to understand how we're going to have world peace, how we're going to fix the economy and provide better jobs for people and better income and fix social issues, social services. So I think it happened that year. Was that 16?
Yeah, that was that's when Jeb Bush ran.
Yeah,
in 2016.
Yeah, and our governor.
That was quite a wild set of debates that they had that year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, and that's the media. They want that. They're just trying to sell, their product on TV and get people to watch it, and that's unfortunate because I think what we need to do is listen a little bit more, and talk a little bit more, and tell the story. Tell the story of why you're there. Tell the story of what's been successful in your life as far as your political career. But I think that's what we've got to get back to is talking more and not trying to figure out what my soundbite's going to be to take that person next to me down.
Yeah, it strikes me that there's a really kind of interesting relationship there, and I'm thinking back to that debate. In fact, that you have on the one hand, as you say, the media expectation. They're looking for the soundbite, but then you also have the candidate, especially at the national level, that is looking for the soundbite they want out there. right? And so you have this kind of interesting relationship that between the media and the candidates. And at the same time, sometimes candidates will say, "Oh, the media, I hate the media," but they use the media. And it strikes me that that debate was one of those that was really interesting to see them almost trying to one up the other to get the sound bites. You know, fascinating, really interesting. Is it possible to have that? I agree with you that about conversation. Is it possible at the most extremes ideologically to have conversations anymore?
I think it is. It's just harder during a campaign. I mean, seriously, I mean, once you're in office, we're always popping into each other's offices and we're having that conversation, because my job is, if I want something, I've got to go get the votes. And I got to make sure, I either need to know where that individual's at, or I need to try to understand why they don't like whatever my bill is or my issue is. And I need to understand that, because sometimes we'll just have to agree to disagree. But other times, they didn't quite understand what my bill did and why I was proposing it. And things would come around. So we're still having those conversations. It's just, it's unfortunate for the people who are trying to figure out who to vote for. Those debates, and the national one is probably, you have more sound bites. And you're right, though, you're using the media sometimes because you have to get that sound bite out there so they'll print it. If I just explain something that may be super articulate and correct, but it takes me 60 seconds to do it, probably not going to pick up on that. And that's unfortunate.
I think that it is enheartening to hear that those conversations happen, because oftentimes as a voter or constituents, we're not aware that those conversations are happening. And in fact, we're led to believe that they're not happening. That there's definitely a lack of communication. So it's heartening to hear this. Good to hear that. And I think about the years that you've put into the work that you've done. 20 years of Senate, and then I think you said 6 years prior to that. 26 years. If I hope you have an opportunity sometime, but if you were a mentor for someone who was getting into politics, if that was something they were interested in doing, what are the kinds of, if you were to write a white paper for them about the things that you've learned, the things that you would recommend for them right off the bat, and I think you've mentioned a couple of those already, but what would you put into that kind of mentorship, things you wanted them to know, or you think was important for them to know as they begin their journey into representing the people in their area?
Well, I always tell people, especially if they're campaigning, go figure out what your 3 or 4 topics are and stay with that. And especially if those topics are important to your district. The second thing is, don't get into a rabbit hole. We always say that, because we'll be talking to, our colleague or something like that. And the next thing you know, you're losing them. And I'm like, oh yeah, I went somewhere else, So because it's back to that soundbite, you got to stay a little bit on the surface, because you're casting over to a broad, diverse group of people. And you got to be at a level in which that they can understand. I don't know if this is the place to say this, but we're talking about my years of service. One of the things that I did over the years was I always knew my core values. And I tried to know and be perceptive of the core values of my district. And I would weigh those two things, along with The reason I got elected was to go to Topeka and sit in committees where you hear cutting edge information. They voted for me to send me there to listen to that. And I take that extra information that I have gleaned from, and I weigh it with those values of my district and of my own personal values. And that has been very good for me to determine how to vote. And I guess it's worked for 26 years. But if you start, I think what happens, especially with new folks, they get pressured by leadership, they get pressured by lobbyists. They want to make people happy. And if you don't have those core values that you know are true to you and true to your district, you'll make one vote one year and a different vote on the same issue the next year. And people will respect you more, whether they agree with your vote or not, that you stay consistent and aren't just hopping around because you got an election coming up, that type of thing. It's important to know why you voted the way you did. And I know we have a lot of special interest groups out there now that tell people how to vote and tell them why they should vote that way, instead of you yourself knowing why you're making that vote. And that's very important when you go to legislative updates. People want to know, they may not agree with you, but they want to know why you made that vote.
I think that goes to one of the foundations, I think, of being able to do our jobs well and to have good conversations. That is, can I trust somebody? If I can trust somebody, they can explain not only why they have a particular position, but even maybe why they processed and come to even a different point at some point. But it's about me being able to trust somebody. And to do that, you have to be transparent and being able to express yourself.
You know, this is a really interesting point you raise around the core values. And I am aware that there are people that I know in my life and people I know also in politics where over the years their core values shift. You know, it's not that on a whim, it is because they have learned more. They have changed as a person. Their understanding has changed around an issue. When that happens, it would seem like that could potentially create some real challenges for them within their district. If you're a politician, that people are saying, wait a minute, even though 10 years ago you felt this way, now today you're feeling something different. What have you observed either in your own career or in the careers of others when their core values have shifted some in terms of how that impacts them in their position and their districts?
How they have changed?
Well, how does it impact their relationship, and how do they navigate that? Or if this has happened for you, how have you navigated that when you have changed on some positions and needed to bring your constituents along with you?
Well, I'm going to give you just a real simple example. When I first got into politics, I was considered very conservative. We didn't have far right back then, but I was a very conservative Republican. And we all say, oh, we got to treat government like a business, and we got to cut budgets, and we got to do all those things. One of the things I learned at the county level that I have continued to work on throughout my 20 years as a senator and an appropriator has to do with investing in certain programs saves you as a community in the long run. To give you an example, mental health. I didn't know anything about mental health and IDD issues, intellectual disabilities, and things like that, till I went to the county, because the county commissioners, they're the receivers of those state dollars. that come down. They're the extended arm. And when I found out that, if you have a mental health issue, you don't have to stay there. There are some people that are, quite ill, but the majority, all they might need a caseworker to tell them, did you take your meds today? Or, they might need some counseling. They may have other things going on in their life that's causing this mental breakdown. If we would invest, and we do, in helping those individuals, guess what it does? It helps those individuals either get back to a family state that keeps the family in order, or it gets them back to work. And when they're back to work, they're paying taxes. And that, to me, is one of the greatest examples of how government investment helps your community. And we're dealing still 26 years later, we're working on helping out our emergency rooms. We're finally going to get a hospital here in South Central Kansas that I worked on for a long time. But what's happening, because of people are in crisis, they end up either in the emergency room or they end up in jail. And they don't belong there. And in fact, especially if it's jail, it makes them worse. So now we have these crisis centers that we're helping people. But that would not have happened if the attitude was, we're cut government. Government spends too much. We never see the side of the investment that ends up helping our community be a better place to live.
I had noticed in your bio and some various places that I did a little bit of research on you, that you've been very involved in mental health issues at the state level, and that is something that is pretty near and dear to our hearts. Lamar has worked as a mental health therapist. I did briefly, but have spent all of my career in social services. Effectively. So I really appreciate that you have been involved, and I can understand and see where coming in as you did, that is not something that you necessarily associate with conservative Republicans. And so that had to be a bit of a shift for you, but it seems that you've done a nice job of bringing your constituents along with you in seeing the value of that. So kudos. That's great.
And you made that comment too about, and then how do you explain that to your constituents? Well, you just explain it. When you have an update, those kind of, or if you mail a letter, those types of things. You got to, it's part of being in public service is about educating and teaching people what's going on so that they understand why you do what you do, and how that helps their communities.
Well, so we've made this interview about you, but now we're going to make it about us. So, knowing a little bit more about us and about what we're trying to do in this podcast, how do you think we can encourage more people to have civil conversations and dialogue, especially in today's politically polarized climate?
Well, I think first off, doing what you're doing right now, and trying to bring different people on to have a conversation that are in different capacities, and how do they solve those kinds of problems. So, doing your podcast on this particular area. I think the other thing, though, is that I've been very interested in is how do we get our younger folks more involved in being a public servant? We throw the word around politics or politician, and for me, it has always been about being a public servant and having that mentality. And I think we have with either the millennials or the Gen Zs, from what I've read, they have a compassion for taking care of the earth, taking care of people, and those kind of things. But what have we done as as baby boomers, I should say? I don't know if you guys are that old or not, but What are we doing to mentor them into being public servants? And that would be something that I would like for you to think about, not to tell you how to do your program, but it's an interest of mine because I just want to figure out why more are not getting in. Now, briefly, I guess, because we're going to run out of time, we have increased the pay at the State House as of starting next year. And I think that'll help some because they're either trying to raise a family or they're trying to buy a home. And the way we have been paid for the last 3 decades only provides people who have their spouse has another job or whatever that opportunity, because who's going to employ you from June to December? So anyway, I just share that because I think that's something that I'd like to know more about from our youth.
Well, I appreciate that response, definitely. And I just started attending our city council meetings for the first time. It's like before, I always told myself I didn't have enough time. It's like, look what I've been missing for a long time is understanding what's going on around me and watching people work. So I think we'll take that challenge from you. I think it's a good challenge. Let me ask you this question in wrapping this up. What questions do you have for Tom or I, if you have questions?
Well, kind of what encouraged you to start this, one? And secondly, what was your biggest hurdle or two to move forward to where you are today?
With the podcast, or
yes, with the podcast.
Oh my. Well, Lamar, you want to go first?
Well, because of our backgrounds, first of all, and we've been friends since we were kids, but our lives have paralleled. One of the things that I think we both have spent a lot of time doing is dealing with difficult situations over our careers, in whatever field we were in at the time. And that's been challenging for us, but I've realized that communication has been the key factor in being successful in dealing with difficult situations. Respect, transparency, the civil kinds of conversations. And during COVID, we were having podcasts like every week, not podcasts, I'm sorry, Zoom meetings with our spouses having coffee, because who else are you going to have coffee with, right? And so we were having coffee, and we just began talking about how the conversations that we were watching on television and hearing just didn't seem to be very civil or have much behind them. And that was concerning to us. So over that time is kind of when we decided maybe we could put together a podcast focusing on how do you have civil conversation and why that's so important.
Yeah, I think that's a good summation. The only thing I would add on that is that besides watching what was happening on TV during the COVID pandemic, what was happening on social media was far, far worse in terms of things that were blowing up, and because you could just rant and rave and scream and yell at people without any consequence, on social media. And I think that while there was some temptation, I think that we both felt, and I especially felt, to kind of engage in some of that when I was having a rather bad day, you might say. But what we realized is that wasn't productive, and especially as we have seen our politics turn so negative and so contentious. We just felt like how do we contribute in a way that might make a difference? So I think that, and in terms of the challenges of doing a podcast, holy cow, Carolyn, just simply doing a podcast. I mean, yeah, you wondered if we are of the age of baby boomers, and I just want to say, yeah, I'm way beyond the age of baby boomers, and I won't speak for Lamar, but I kind of know he is too. But
There's so much we did not know. Yeah.
We did not know. I mean, if you go back and look at our first couple of podcasts, they were pretty rough, and we're getting better. We think at least people have given us a lot of suggestions that on lighting, on sound and stuff like that. We've tried to take those to heart, and we think it's getting better. We hope it's getting better. But we're having a great time doing it. It doesn't matter in the sense if
Well,
we wanted to get better, but
I did listen to a couple of them. I'm not really I'm great on the whole technology, but since I work on a farm and I'm retiring to a farm, there's lots of work out there that you can just put your earbuds in and listen.
Yeah, that's right.
To positive things.
Yeah. Well, actually, what are you going to do in retirement now that you are leaving the battlefield of American politics?
Well, my husband and I still farm, and we have a vineyard. And so I'm looking at an agri-tourism venue. And the reason is, a lot of reasons. But one, if you have a vineyard and you have a producer's license, you can get people out here if you tell them you're going to do a wine tasting, right? But we live about 8 minutes from Wichita, the largest city in Kansas. And I kind of started before politics in Farm Bureau. And one of the things that was important to us is you have to tell the story of agriculture. Because if you don't tell the story of agriculture, someone else is going to tell it for you. And we're less than 2% of the population. So we want to get people out here. We want to talk to them about how we grow crops, how do we take care of our sheep and things like that, because they don't always get that opportunity to come to a farm anymore. And so anyway, I'm going to tell the story of agriculture.
Well, that's exciting. And that could be another podcast. Well, I have to tell you, I had read about this, the vineyard and that you all are putting together. And I recently went out to visit Tom, my wife, and I recently went out there, and I took some Kansas wine with me to share with some folks on the East Coast, right? And so I will look forward to that opportunity again, and maybe we could someday take some of your wine with us.
That'd be great. And we sell at Grays Hill, and they're making some pretty good wine these days. Remember the stories in the 80s? Don't drink Kansas wine. It's just syrup, right? But now we're making some pretty good wines in Kansas.
Yep. I took some Grays Hill to Tom.
Well, we loved that wine, by the way, and we took a picture of the label for the next time we get out there. So, it was really, really nice. Carolyn, thank you so much for being a part of this podcast. I just really appreciate it. This has been a lot of fun to get to know you and to talk with you. And can we bug you to come back on again sometime?
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah.
Okay.
I was a little bit delayed getting on this first time, but I'm going to have a little more time. So, and be happy to do that.
Great.
Thank you, Carolyn. Very much appreciate the time.
You bet. Yeah. Thank you.
Tom here. Thank you for listening to Getting to Third Space with Lamar and Tom. Remember to click on subscribe to get notices about new episodes, and be sure to like and share the podcast as well. Opinions and ideas expressed in this podcast are solely those of Lamar Roth and Tom Klaus, and we'd like to hear your opinions and ideas too. You can leave us a voice message on Spotify, or you can email us at the addresses found in the show notes. Also, in the show notes, you can find links to some of the things we talked about today, so you can check them out yourself. Until next time, keep moving forward toward third space.